Beautiful people, this is the upper limb playlist by Salma Sulaiman, and we're going to be starting the revision of the arteries. The first arteries that we do have in our upper limb is the axillary artery. Okay, let's start. The axillary artery begins at the outer border of the first rib as continuation of the subclavian artery. Right, here's the subclavian artery. Okay. Throughout its course, it's cut by the pectoralis minor into three parts, and by common sense, the one that is above the pectoralis minor is the first part, deep to it is the second part, and below it is the third part. So again, at the outer border of the first rib as continuation of the subclavian, from the first part, by the way, and throughout its course, it's cut by the pectoralis minor into three parts, first, second, and third. It ends at the lower border of the teres major to be the brachial artery. Great. So that's so easy. Great. Oh, I want to tell you we do have a 3D model to discuss the relations. But again, it's the continuation of the subclavian. Throughout its course, it's cut by three parts: first, second, and third, above, deep, and below, and ends at the lower border of the teres major to be the brachial. We want to discuss the branches of the axillary artery. Before we go to the 3D model and discuss the relations. First thing, I want to tell you that we do have three numbers: 1, 2, and 3. Okay, that's perfect. The first part gives one branch, second part 2 branches, third part 3 branches. Oh, that's amazing. So again, for the number gives the number of the part is the number of the branches. First part 1 branch, second part 2 branches, third part 3 branches. We want to begin with the first part, that one. That gives the superior thoracic artery. And guess what? When we like to say about something that is superior, oh, it's so high, so it genuinely gives something that is so important. What's that? Oh, that's the thoracic wall itself. So that's the blood supply for the thoracic wall. And guess what? Those big two. Oh, these are the pectoral muscles. I want to draw it in somewhere. Yeah. By the way, the pectoralis major is above the pectoralis minor, and I know that. So again, the pectoral muscles. What did I draw? Anyway, here is it. Pectoralis major, pectoralis minor. I know it's deep to it, but no problem. It gives the pectoral muscles, but since pectoralis minor is not that superior, that we're talking about the superior thoracic artery here, just gives the upper border of the pectoralis minor. And the breast. And leave that here because I'm going to use it. Great. So again, what does it supply? The superior thoracic artery. It should give something that is important. The thoracic wall, the breast, and the pectoral muscles. But since pectoralis minor is not that important, it just gives the upper border of the pectoralis minor. And then we do have the second part of the axillary artery. What does it give? Oh, that's so easy. First thing is the acromiothoracic artery. Let me remove that. Acromiothoracic. So it genuinely gives 4 branches. That's, by the way, the acromiothoracic artery. It gives 4 branches. And since it's called acromiothoracic, so the first branch is to the acromion. So acromiothoracic artery to the acromion. And then what's above the acromion here? I'm sorry. Oh, then the deltoid. And then for the clavicle. And then for those big two. Pectoralis major, pectoralis minor. Great. It's not like that. It's like that. 2, 3. Okay, I'm terrible at drawing, and I took in drawing this scapula about 30 minutes, but no problem. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. That's the coracoid process, so that's the pectoralis minor, and that's the pectoralis major. If you didn't understand that, just wipe it out. So again, the acromiothoracic artery, giving a acromial, a deltoid, a clavicular, and a pectoral branch. And then there's the lateral thoracic artery. Oh, that lateral thoracic artery goes on the lower border of the pectoralis minor to supply the lateral aspect of the breast. If she was a female, the lower border of the pectoralis minor and the serratus anterior muscle. Great, that's perfect. And then there's the, don't forget, the acromiothoracic artery pierces the clavipectoral fascia. To continue. And then the third part, I'm trying to be so concise here. The third part, there's a very important artery that is so huge, and that's the biggest part, the biggest branch of the axillary artery. Who's that? That's the subscapular artery. And guess what? It goes at the lower border of the subscapularis muscle. And then it continues to give me a circumflexoscapular artery, one of its branches, and then it gives the thoracoacromial artery. Who's that? Thoracodorsal artery. I'm sorry. Who's the thoracodorsal artery? Oh, that's the artery that supplies the latissimus dorsi. Great. So, and then the subscapular artery, lower border of subscapularis, giving the circumflex scapular to continue as the thoracodorsal, that supplies the latissimus dorsi. And then we do have the anterior and posterior circumflex humeral. What do those people do? The anterior circumflex humeral goes genuinely in front of the surgical neck. Oh, by the way, I know that humerus should be here, but I genuinely couldn't draw it that way, and I wanted to demonstrate those two circumflexes. Great. So the anterior circumflex humeral, that gives an ascending branch to go and anastomose around the shoulder joint, and the posterior circumflex humeral that gives a descending branch to anastomose with the ascending branch of the profunda brachii artery. That's important for the next page. Okay. So again, tell me the branches real quick. First part, one branch, superior thoracic artery. Since it's superior, give something that is important. What's that? That's the thoracic wall, that's the breast, and that's the pectoral muscles. Great. Don't forget, just the upper border of the pectoralis minor. Superior border of pectoralis minor, that would help. Again, the second part, there's the first branch pierces the clavipectoral fascia, and it gives 4 branches. Acromiothoracic, so acromion, clavicle, pectoral muscles. That is here in the bicipital groove. And the last one is for the deltoid. Great. And then we do have the lateral thoracic artery. Who's that? Oh, that artery goes at the lower border of pectoralis minor. It goes to supply the lateral aspect of the breast of the mammary gland if she's a female. Besides the serratus anterior and the pectoralis minor. Great, lower border of course. And then the third part, it gives 3 branches. First one, subscapular artery. What does it do? It gives me the circumflex scapula that continues as the thoracodorsal to supply the latissimus dorsi. Thank you. And then we do have the anterior circumflex humeral. It gives an ascending branch. Besides, it goes in front of the surgical neck of the humerus. That ascending branch shares in the anastomosis around the shoulder joint. And then the posterior circumflex humeral gives a descending branch, and it goes behind the surgical neck of the humerus. Don't forget, those two circumflexes anastomose together in the end. Now, anastomosis around the shoulder joint, which I just mentioned, dude. Okay, first thing, that artery is very, very, very important. Here's it. I drew it in a picture alone. Look how important it is. Oh, not here. We're not here. Sorry. Yeah. Who's that? That's the suprascapular artery. It's a branch of the subclavian. That artery shares in every anastomosis we're gonna discuss in that video. Okay. First one, the anastomosis around the shoulder joint. First one, suprascapular artery. So the first one, from the first part of the subclavian, it gives the suprascapular artery. That one. Great. Even here it's around the shoulder joint. And then we do have from the second part of the axillary artery, it gives the acromiothoracic. And since we're talking shoulder, so it's definitely the acromion, and what's above, that's the deltoid. So the second part of the axillary artery from the acromiothoracic artery giving from the deltoid and acromial branches. And then the third part of the axillary artery through the anterior circumflex humeral that gives me an ascending branch. So again, what is the anastomosis around the shoulder joint? Oh, the letter that is so important here is the letter A. Why? 1. The suprascapular artery from the first part of subclavian. Okay, here's the letter A. 2. From the second part of the axillary artery, it gives the acromiothoracic artery that gives the deltoid and acromial branches. Oh, these are letter A. So acromial branch from the acromiothoracic besides the deltoid, and the suprascapular artery. The last one, the ascending branch from the anterior circumflex humeral. All these are the letter A. Okay, and it goes upwards to anastomose. Then there's the anastomosis around the surgical neck. Let me delete that. And again, is there anything that is deleted here? Yeah, perfect. First thing is the suprascapular artery. Oh, that's amazing. And then we do the suprascapular artery from the subclavian, and then we do have the anterior and posterior circumflexes that go here around the surgical neck. So 1, the suprascapular artery. 2, anterior and posterior circumflex humeral arteries. Then 3, oh, remember that artery we were talking about, that it's called the profunda brachii. Okay, who's that? That gives an ascending branch that anastomoses with the descending branch of the posterior circumflex humeral. Anyways, just know that the brachial artery gives a profunda brachii that gives an ascending branch. That branch shares in the anastomosis around the surgical neck of the humerus. So again, anastomosis around the surgical neck of the humerus. First thing, we do have the suprascapular artery. We said that's the main artery, and then the anterior posterior circumflex humerals, which are from the second part of the axillary, and from the third part of the from the third part of the axillary, and then from the brachial artery, we do have the ascending branch of the profunda brachii. Great. So let's go move forward to the anastomosis around the scapula. Since we're talking about the anastomosis around the scapula, who's the main artery? Oh, yes, the suprascapular, where we do have an artery called the subclavian that gives something called the thyrocervical trunk, and that thyrocervical trunk gives me 2 arteries, the suprascapular and the deep branch of the transverse cervical artery. Okay, so what from the first part of the subclavian, we give something called the thyrocervical trunk, and that thyrocervical trunk gives me 2 things, the suprascapular and the deep branch of the transverse cervical artery. Great. Yeah. And then we have from the third part of the axillary artery, there's the subscapular artery, remember, where the subscapular and the circumflex scapular. So the big artery and its son. Great. So the big artery and its son. Don't forget that. So again, the first one from the first part of the subclavian, that takes from the thyrocervical trunk of the subclavian to give me the suprascapular and the deep branch of the transverse cervical, and then from the third part of the axillary artery, where we do use the subscapular and the circumflex scapular, and from the posterior intercostals of the descending aorta. Great. If you remember, the descending thoracic aorta gave 9 posterior intercostal branches. These branches shared in that anastomosis. Be aware that these anastomoses do share in the where if there's any obstruction between the first part of the subclavian and the third part of the axillary, any obstruction that way could be bypassed by that sort of anastomosis. So a quick review again. Yeah, here. The axillary artery begins at the outer border of the first strip as continuation of the, good, the subclavian, and then it's like divided by the pectoralis minor into 3 parts. What are they? Yeah, first, second, and third. You're smart. And then the third part, and it ends at the lower border of the teres major. Great. What about the branches? 1 branch, superior thoracic artery. 2 branches. The acromiothoracic that gives 4 branches, and the lateral thoracic. Third part that gives the 3 branches, anterior circumflex humeral, posterior circumflex humeral, and the subscapular. What about the anastomosis? Oh, around the shoulder joint, we're talking the first part of the subclavian, suprascapular, and then the second part of the axillary. Oh, we're talking here about the acromiothoracic artery that gives the acromial and deltoid branches. Oh, what about the third part of the axillary? Oh, it shares the anastomosis around the shoulder joint by the anterior circumflex humeral ascending branch. What about the anastomosis around the surgical neck? Oh, we're talking here first part of subclavian, the descending branch of the suprascapular. The third part of the axillary, we're talking anterior posterior circumflex humerals that both anastomose together, and the ascending branch from the profunda brachii, that is from the brachial artery. Great. And then we're talking about the anastomosis around the scapula. Who's the main artery? Suprascapular. But not just the suprascapular, where we do have the subclavian giving me a thyrocervical trunk that gives the suprascapular and the deep branch of the transverse cervical artery, and then from the third part of the axillary, where it gives the subscapular artery that gives the circumflex scapular, and these share in the anastomosis. So subscapular and circumflex scapular. Don't forget the posterior intercostals of the descending thoracic aorta. Now we're going to talk relations.